learning Torah like it's any other subject, like it's not a Maisa Kodesh. You learn, it is holy. This is holy. This is a part of the holy Torah that God gave us at Mount Sinai. No, we don't hear that you will inherit it. In other words, it requires an individual effort. And the individual effort must be such that you overcome any impediments in anything that could possibly come in the way of things. Now, obviously, this requires a tremendous, serious effort. You have to dedicate yourself to a very, and not to let anything stand in the way. Joe, could you let us see what you... Fine. The third part, all your actions should be for sake of heaven. The first Israel continues to say, it's Kuf Chof Aleph. You see how you find it there? It tells you the parsha there. This is talking about the service of God. It's got to be the Shem Shema. Even when you engage the necessities if you're making a living, Kavin, you should have intent to strengthen yourself, to serve. In other words, you must formulate all your activity with the kedusha, the holiness, and the dedication that is when you're dealing with, and you're going to serve them on a proper level. And it must be all a complete 100% service. And these are goals that Rabbi Yosef is saying you have to aim for. He says if you will do all these things, if you will engage in Gemilut Chasodim in relation to your fellow Jew, in all areas, and as I pointed out, it's a legitimate, maybe not only to project it on a question of his physical well-being or his emotional, but also his spiritual well-being. And also, if you will serve God by preparing yourself to learn Torah, regardless of anything that may appear to be superficially standing in your way. If you really use what it actually appears to most people being an impediment, it becomes instead a help. It solidifies and steals your determination to serve God and to persist in the service of God and learn Torah and become a true Ben Torah the way it should be. All your actions, regardless whether they are what you would classify as mitzvahs or what you have to do in order to continue existing, they all must be done in order to serve the Rabbeinu Shalom with a proper motive.
The first person is not used to doing it in this proper way. If everything, your intent behind everything is, I'm doing this so I do that better, regardless whether you're really into that.
I'm sure it will. The first Mishnah in the second chapter that we had previously started last week. This is just the way of Zui, Derek, Kishora, what is the proper, straight way, Moshis, Tiferes, Losel, everything that is proper for him to do, and it's proper in the opinion of people that he should do. In other words, it's not something that he would be ashamed to do in the Torah. He must be diligent in the service of God, doing even with a mitzvah that may be easy for you to fulfill, or in your opinion may be of a very insignificant nature, as what you may consider very difficult to fulfill, or in your opinion may be considered a more serious nature. Because you do not know the reward given for mitzvah, you should consider what you lose in doing mitzvah, the negative score in relation to what you gain by doing that.
This is also presuming words because you don't know what reward this. Could this also be presuming that the reward you can measure how much God? Is there a correlation between that or not?
Let me read the Mishnah and I'll get back to this, but I will tell you just one concept right now. One concept. When I talk about reward, I'm not only talking about what you think you're getting out of it, but there are money benefits that are not apparent. It's not simplistic like you would imagine. A person goes to work, he earns $500 for a certain work period. So he knows he's getting $500, but there may be other small fringe benefits that are, maybe for instance, he has to work in an area where it can develop a tremendous amount of heat. And if he works in an area that has air conditioning, he doesn't have to suffer a more preferable way than if he has to fall on his face every time he's trying to make a dollar. So the work conditions are also a necessary part of the thing. That's a part of the reward you get. When the Rabbi Shalom tells benefit is some portion of either our physical well-being or our spiritual well-being. Whatever it is, we do not know necessarily any of the will of God. And therefore, when we use the reward, we don't know. In other words, you will translate, we don't know the consequences of our doing this mitzvah. Not just the reward. It won't translate as a reward, the ramifications of that mitzvah. We don't appreciate.
You can judge how important this particular one God held this importance by the fact how much we get from it. Is there a correlation between it or not necessarily? So you shouldn't assume because you know that keep it up name you get that you shouldn't do another one that in your mind maybe you wouldn't get that.
The whole thing is that you must divorce yourself, that you are in a position to make a cheshbon, an understanding of why God is asking you to do anything. You must understand the Rabbi Shem is asking you to do it because it is pleasing to him that you do it. Why he asks you to do it, even if you don't comprehend the reason, it is nevertheless pleasing to him that you should do it in the way he asks you to do it. Don't be a great chacham and try to figure out all the reasons why God asks you to do something. There may be some reasons you haven't even got any concept. It may not necessarily be what you think it is at all. And this is what the time of our mission is admonishing us. Don't get the impression that you can go and weigh and have great seichel and you can figure out why a person should do these meritorious things. You have no concept of that. You're so vital from knowing the emes that it is fruitless for you to engage in such idle speculation. You may discern certain signs of punishments given that you may think in your simplistic mind that one is more hideous in the eyes of God than the other, but both require you to go and do the will of God. So what difference does it make to you what your perception is when it is the will of God that you have to perform? It's nothing to do with your perception of what it is. And it should not even be anything to motivate you. Your concept must be at all times to do whatever is required to do. If it is something that God wants you to do, you must do it with the same enthusiasm, the same completeness, the same generous effort, and every way, no matter what it represents the will of God. Even if in your humble opinion, and it is humble in relation to important, why should I beat my brains out of it? I recall Moshe is not here today, and I recall Moshe, he came to me about a month ago. He says, Rabbi, he said, do you remember once we were learning, and he says, I thought there was really nothing to get excited about, and why should we learn it? He says, but now I learned the Rambam, and says, this is one of the examples the Rambam gives, that you're not supposed to make a cheshbon.
It says like learning.
Yeah, you're not. So we're never permitted. That's we have the simplistic point of view. We assume that we are capable of analyzing the reasons. Nothing can be further from the truth up to the present day. It's his Torah. The Torah has a depth beyond our comprehension. And no matter how much we learn Rabbeinu, we still not exhausted it. And Rashi brings the Chumash there, where he says Yaakov Avinu with one of his own titles, Kael, God, called Yaakov Avinu, give that name. So he says that you hit an anvil with the hammer. Every time you hit it, sparks always go out in a different direction. And that's the same thing with Torah. No matter how much you delve into Rabbeinu, you can bring a few more for the others if they want. Hashem, you see, over the years, I've been doing the Sedra. I can quote. If you study and do the Sedra for over 40 years, so with God's help, it gets to sink in. Yeah. I learned God's. Yeah. This would be on. You have it? Page 78 in Bereshit. 78. The ramifications of mitzvah. And we don't know also, even in the area of what we have to do, don't realize that either. In mitzvah, you should consider what you will lose in doing a sefer. You have to spend some time, you have to spend some money, whatever you have to do, or some energy. It's a chorah in relation to what you get out of it. Consider in any way that this is just a little thing. Our foremother, she gives water. You know about this, you understand what I mean? But you understand how they We will continue with this Mishnah. Yisurim we talk about, the Torah says, only through Yisurim, through these troubles, can a person come to have a chit, can a person have a portion in the world to come. Now, if you understand that you cannot have a portion in God's Torah, that means you can't do any of the commandments of God in a proper way, because you don't know what, and you can't have any portion in the world to come unless you have problems, then immediately you understand in your mind's eye that the problems are not a curse, they are a blessing. But it's very hard for a person to appreciate that at the time. It's very difficult indeed to be philosophical when the problem is very real and very evident and very present. It's not something in the future. It's right now facing you and it's staring you right in the face. And it takes a tremendous amount of courage and faith to appreciate this fact. These problems are given to you by God. They are definitely given by God to help you. Now, how you can be helped by problems sometimes very devastating to even contemplate. But I'll give you an example. We have a situation where two children are playing ball. One child hits the ball and breaks a window. Whatever. Hits the ball and breaks a window. So the parent of one, so he capacity to grab either child, but he grabs his own child and gives him a licking. So the children, a strange child, feel very bad, very fine about it that he wasn't hit, and his own child was bewildered. As soon as he could get his chance, he talked to his father, and he asked his father. He says, "Daddy, didn't you say you love me?" He says, "Of course, dear, I love you. Why did you hit me? If you hit me, why didn't you hit the other boy? You should hit the other boy too. If you had to hit anybody, you should hit the other one. Don't hit me at all." He says, "With you, my son, I love. If I hit you, the other one I don't love."
The psychology behind that is because he cares.
What
his own child becomes.
What the own child will become. He doesn't necessarily care very much what the other child will become. But to the child, it looks perverted justice. It doesn't appear to be perverted. We have to arise above a mere infantile point of view. I know that's very difficult indeed. You got a series of definite things that are traumatic in nature, and they overwhelm you, and yet you're called upon to have this kind of an outlook, and it's very difficult to have that kind of. I'll appreciate that, but that's what the Gemara is trying to teach us. At no time is a person without the supervision of God. We call that Ashkochas Protio. God is very particular to investigate each individual human being on the face of this earth. No person lives his life without personal supervision by God. Now God, when He supervises us, He's trying to go and test us from time to time to see what our reaction will be. As you remember, we discussed this several times. The Gemara says everything comes from heaven except the fear of heaven. That means everything. All these yisurim, all these troubles come from God. And don't assume that God hates you if you got troubles. That is not to be interpreted that way. Rather, it should be interpreted that God loves us. God loves us. Otherwise, He would not have sent these trials and tribulations. But the truth is that God loves us. But in addition to God loving us, we have a tremendous opportunity. Every time we have one of these crises, we can rise to the occasion and not flunk the test, but rather pass it. You can say, regardless of what God is doing to me or my perception, I will still strive to be a decent person, a good Jew. I'll still strive to be that. Even though it appears to me that I am being blocked off from every area of doing what I should be doing, what God Himself wants me to do, yet I will still persist and I will still try. And I will accept this as another way of God indicating that He is watching me and He wants me to rise to a higher degree of spirituality. It is very difficult. It is so hard that
most people lose sight of it. And it's very difficult because it's not the way you would ordinarily react to a situation. But if you consider, number one, the Rabbeinu Shalom is the epitome of everything good. There is nothing the Rabbeinu Shalom does that is bad. He does everything good. In the 145th Psalm, God is good to everybody. He's good to us. Everything He does is for our good. So why should we assume that Yisurim is not for our good? Why should we assume that trials and tribulations are not for good? This is the Tevis Beggar. That's right. You know why it keeps coming? I know this sounds strange. It keeps coming because you're trying to be a better person.
The more you try to, God will help you.
The more God
to improve yourself.
Yes.
So in effect, it may seem like
you may get a test, it's no picnic. But if you can successfully meet each one of those tests, you'll rise to such a high degree of spiritual worth. Unbelievable. But you see, this is what's required, and this is very difficult. It's not something you would on your own choose. You would think, let's not get so. Listen, God, if you want to test me, let's a little itsy test. The trouble is, life has a way of marching on, and life in this Olam Hazeh is very short indeed. There's not too much time to measure up before you get to the point where you realize what you're supposed to be doing. A good portion of your life is already past you. You've already passed already, and you've got to make up for what you have lost time, if you will. So if God in His wisdom understands that you are coming, and hopefully you are, and we are coming, to try to be better people, we're trying. We're not trying to go and turn our backs on our responsibility. We're not trying to be wicked in the eyes of God. God forbid. We're going to try to be righteous people, tzaddikim. May not be much, but we're going to try our best. So God in heaven understands that. If you have a track record wanting to do the right thing and doing the right thing every time you have an opportunity to do, even in those occasions when you cannot do the right thing, you're doing the right thing. You understand? So you're not being gypped in any way, even if your perception is that you're not making any appreciable progression in this area. But the mere fact that God is giving these trials and tribulations to you is a very healthy sign. It's a sign that God has not given up on you. The Talmud, the Medrash says that God tests everybody in the beginning. He tests everybody according to what they need to test. But later on, when a person gets to a point where he has made a definite decision in a certain way, if God forbid he's a wicked type, and real confirmed wicked type, then he doesn't get too many tests. There's nothing to test. It's like pouring water in a broken vessel. No matter how much you pour, the water is not going to stay there. You understand? The only thing you test is something that has some kind of possibility. If a farmer has two animals, one is a sickly animal and one is a healthy animal, and he's got to do work around the farm, he's not going to use a sickly animal. He can't get any work done with a sickly animal. The same thing is when God has His work to be done here, He needs, while He chooses to use our services, so He's going to use those that are inclined to do His service. Isn't that sensible? Well, that's all. So the mere fact that you have these trials and tribulations, this is a healthy sign. This is a bracha, a blessing. Would you believe it? A blessing. And it's to be accepted as a blessing. Now that is a very difficult thing to do. To accept a blessing with the proper attitude. He's got to get in there.
He's a concession.
Sir, I haven't started learning the Gemara until you showed up.
All right, thank you.
I wouldn't want you to feel that in any way you're being shortchanged.
Yesterday.
It is true we have made certain discussions, but this is the nature of that we have a discussion. Mike here came and he was very upset.
About what?
He has a lot of troubles occurring, and they're not coming one at a time, and they're coming in packs. That's the way it is, guys. It's not just coming, a little at a time. You grow into it, something that you really don't. You don't have to go and have too much of a traumatic experience. But all of a sudden, he's getting all kinds of from left and right, and behind him, in front of him.
Yeah.
Would it surprise you? Would it surprise you what I just said from behind him, in front of him, and and all sides of him. Would it surprise you to say that I am paraphrasing in the Sila Shishorim, the paths of the just, that he says, this is what God places you in this world.
If he gives me back my other book, I'll give him the Messiah.
A great rabbi who lived in the early 1700s, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzarno. And he was a tremendous scholar. Unfortunately, he didn't live too long. But he wrote several scoring, but this is a classic. Ever since he wrote it, it's been accepted by all Jews as one of the most beautiful books that ever been written.
Oh, yeah.
It's translated in English.
Yeah.
It's got 26 chapters. Every place else, it tells you how to serve God. And it takes you step by step. And if you do everything that has to be done, you will have done a complete job. So he starts out and he says, you don't have here in this Olam Hazeh, this world, ideal conditions where you can concentrate on doing the will of God without any opposition. It goes on, all right, you get around to it, all right, fine, warm up, and then I'll run the race and do this particular mitzvah, and then you can rest a little bit, and then do something else, and you do a very nice thing, and you're always engaged in doing it. Life is not like that in this world. You're placed in the middle of a battlefield, and you got enemies from all sides of you, all of it attacking you on all directions, and yet you're supposed to function, and yet you're supposed to try to do the will of God. Now, that certainly separates the men from the boys. But what's important to understand the challenges there. The whole thing is a question of recognizing the position you're in. It's not a question of being despondent and discouraged that you seem to be overwhelmed with these problems, and therefore, who can help you? The truth is, only God can help you. Once you appreciate that only God can help you, your problems subside. You just do what you have to do, and you can rest assured God will do what He has. You understand? It's a question of attitude. People drive themselves meshugim. They drive themselves nuts. They think that they can handle every problem that comes to them. Nothing can be further from the truth. It's impossible. And if you think you can, God will give you enough difficulties that you will realize sooner or later that you personally cannot handle them all.
Well, I don't understand what you're trying to say. I think one can handle all the problems he's faced with. However, he has to draw on strength from God. He has to ask God's help. He can't solve them all himself.
No, he can't.
But if he gets the problems, how can we say that God presents all these problems to man unless man is able to overcome all these problems?
No, the man can go and try to cope with the situation as he finds it.
Yeah.
Many of these problems definitely need asylum. It's the help of heaven.
All right, true.
And so therefore, he must appreciate the fact that many of the solution of these problems depends on God's help. Once you appreciate that you need God's help in order to successfully meet with life's problems, then you get the proper perspective on how you're supposed to useless here. Obviously, you've got to try to become as good a person as you can.
But why can't you just...
Judaism does not say that belief alone is sufficient. You have to engage in action as best you can. It's not enough believe in God. You have to go and do positive actions, and you have to avoid doing negative actions.
Actually, belief itself is just a realization of your responsibility.
It's a realization also of the great role that God plays in your life. When you believe in God, that means that you appreciate that God is running the show.
I don't know. I don't know if that's his belief. Forgive me. I'm throwing out wild things.
All right.
I believe or think that what he's saying is that he's come to the conclusion and has realized by analysis that there had to be a divine creator of the world, and it didn't happen by itself automatically. God created the world, and he accepts that. He sees that. Now, I don't know if he's come to the belief in God that God is taking a personal interest in each and every person. I don't know if he has come to that.
But I'm trying to
if
teach
he
him today.
accepts that belief, Then he has questions. Why is God piling all this source on me? Then he's got to try and figure out, well, God's piling the source on me. Apparently, he's trying to reward me for all the good things I've done in this world, so that I'll have a smooth track when I get to the Olam Haba. That could be one reason. All right.
Because I'm serious. Because
When you're on your
What
way,
if I
to-
did
What if I told you, 4 or 5 months ago, I lost thousands of dollars, and I had to go to the bank to borrow to pay my debts that came due immediately. I've been learning at the class for a few years. I'm going to cry about it? God, how could God do such a thing? I realize how he could. I was the one that was wrong. God wasn't wrong. I know. I learned a lesson
it's
from
a
it.
question. No, it's also a question of attitude. It's not what happens to you, it's your reaction to what happens. If you can work yourself up to that, and everything that God does to you, you say, well, thanks God, this is also for good, and really mean it, then you're on your way. The Gemara brings the case of Rabbi Akiva. Gemara brings the case of Rabbi Akiva. And the Gemara says Rabbi Akiva was traveling once. He was traveling with a donkey. He had a rooster, and he had a torch. And he comes to a little village that's surrounded by a vast forest. And the sun is setting, and he wants to spend the night in the little village. There's one off forest filled with wild animals. So he knocks on the door of a few villagers, and they wouldn't let him in. Wait,
This is true.
this is in the... So he goes out into the woods. Suddenly the Rabbi makes a tremendous wind come and blows out his torch. Now it's pitch dark, not like in the city where you got street lights. There comes a big wild animal and eats up his donkey. There comes his rooster. He climbs onto the tree. There's no place to go. He climbs in the tree and waits station until the morning. In the morning, as soon as it's light, he goes back to the village. Perhaps they'll give him something to eat. He comes there. The village is entirely destroyed. All the people there are dead. Down, all dead. Then he said to God, thanks God. Thanks God, first of all, that you didn't allow the villagers to let me stay that night. Because if he had stayed that night, it looked like a terrible thing happened to him.
Sure.
Thanks God that you forced me to stay in the forest where the thieves couldn't find me. Thanks God that you brought a wind stock so the donkey couldn't bray and
At daybreak.
all
Because
these
that
things,
would alert
all
them.
they realized later were protected him. At the time, everyone looked like a tremendous tragedy. You understand?
Yeah.
The trouble is, our whole life is like that. Our whole life is the same way. Everything that happens to us, we react like little children. We don't understand what the motivation of the Rabbi Shalom is in bringing this particular trouble upon us. And because we don't understand, we have a reaction that is improper and not proper. I've mentioned this here several times before.
Excuse me. What I think he means by we is the general populace. If you talk to all your other friends, they'll say, my God, horrible things are happening to you. It's true. It appears to be horrible. I think it's horrible too. But nevertheless, it's for the good. It's going to be for some good reason, which we'll later in time look back and know that it had a good purpose. Even though it seems terrible.
And you couldn't have done
That's the way
without
to
it.
look
I
at
mean,
something.
that's-
Latova is the objective. Meaning, everything is best. There's stories in the
See,
Gemara.
not only I can look at
See,
in the Talmud.
Everybody, meaning 99 out of 100, you're going to meet, are going to say, you're going to talk to 1 out of 100, Rabbi Friedlander, he's going to say, true, it is difficult, you're having difficult times, but it's not terrible like everybody else's terrible, because some good is going to come from it. We don't know what the good is at
You
the
can
moment.
understand this thing by virtue of the fact that this is coming by virtue of the will of God. You can rest assured, a lot of times a person has personal tragedies. It's very difficult indeed to be philosophical at that time. It's very difficult. It's very hard. Sometimes it's if you are not physically and spiritually adaptable to this situation, you can be devastated. A person can be devastated by the slightest. You can be devastated, you can be falling apart. But the truth is, if a person is truly firmly have the belief and the faith in God. No matter what happens, it will be accepted with the proper position. You don't go and fall apart.
Abraham, the first Jew,
Wasn't it?
at either at 3 years old, some say that he recognized that there was a God that created the world. Nobody else did. They were all making idols, and he threw that over. So what happened to Avram Avinu? He recognized God. He says, God, I believe in you. I believe in you. And what happens to him? He gets one test and another test, until he's driven to the point where his own son, he binds up because God instructed him, and he's got the knife at the neck of his own child, his only child that got born to him after 100 years. That's the test that he... So what I'm trying to illustrate from that, you've got problems, I've got problems, we all do. But God, when a person says, God, I believe in you, God says, oh, you do? Let me see. So then he gives you a test. And you're still saying, God, I believe in you. Oh, you still do? I'll give you 2 tests. I'll give you 3. In other words, maybe he's heaping it on you. He wants to see. Because you can, the rest of the world, it's very easy to turn your back and live like everybody else who's ignorant. Ignorant is bliss.
Oh, bring me...
Forgive me, I don't know if I'm saying the right thing,
you're
but
right.
it's something to think about.
This is the hardest thing to understand.
Now the point is,
Am I
God
right?
can test you to the point that you're going to say you're going to start complaining to God. He says, "Oh, you're complaining? Okay, I'll stop the things." But the thing is, if He's testing you and you're not complaining, and He keeps giving you the nth degree, and still you can hold up and not complain, God says, "Oh, this man really believes in me. I'm going to reward him." But I can't reward him in this world because he deserves a tremendous amount, and it won't be enough to give him in this world. That's the attitude or the thought that I have that maybe can help you
Listen very
understand.
carefully. To supplement what Shmuel